The Tuesday edition of The Attitude with Arnie Arnesen and producers Dave Scott and Stephanie Collins. We're recording on Monday morning, and the world is mourning the loss of Pope Francis. You don't have to be Catholic to admire the fact that he not only used words, but he used deeds. We're going to continue a conversation we had last week with Lori Wallach. We talked with her last week because she is a 30-year veteran of international and U.S. congressional trade battles. So she took us through NAFTA and WTO. She gave us this incredible history of how we got to this place. And at the end of the history, I had said in the last 2 minutes, well, now you're going to be president for a day, Lori. And I'm going to say, I want you to take me into the future. I want to know how we approach the world that we have now, how we approach international trade, how we approach things where we obviously recognize our need for supply chains and at the same time not to be too dependent on supply chains. I am trying to envision a future where we can uplift our economy, not destroy the world's economy, but yet move forward in a rational and reasonable way. And as I was thinking about this, I pulled something from the article that you had written at the American Prospect. And the article you wrote was, "The trade policy we need, Trump's on again, off again tariffs are incoherent, but that should not discredit targeted tariffs paired with investment on a policy lever." And I think that that is really important because right now, to a lot of Democrats, the word tariff has a very negative meaning. But to the American public at large, in part because of what Donald Trump has said for decades, as you point out, but also the idea that they really do have a sense of resentment of the Chinas and the Germanys and the Vietnams, that all, and let's crack a tariff on them. They took our jobs. They deserve to sort of pay the price. And yet what Donald Trump is doing is not an effective use of tariffs. And we need to define the term, what is an effective tariff? What is Trump doing that is not effective? And what do we need more than that if we really are going to stabilize and invest in our economy? Because tariffs alone are not the answer. So let me welcome you to the program and thank you for round two.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me back.
All right, so let's talk a little bit again, sort of as a recap of last week, that, where are we now and what really happened to the manufacturing sector in America, which devastated especially the Rust Belt and the rural economies. And even as those jobs were disappearing, we really never created an investment to replace them, number one. And not only that, Lori, what I kept thinking about was, so not only did we replace those jobs that had retirement plans and healthcare plans and all these other things, but then we didn't recognize if you're going to be more vulnerable economically, then maybe we should have had universal health care. We didn't do that. Then maybe you should have had something that was a greater investment in retirement. We didn't have that. So they got a knuckle sandwich on every level. They lost their good jobs and they lost their sense of security. And for whatever reason, we either didn't notice and didn't recognize the need to step in. But guess what? Donald Trump is a result of that not noticing. So now not only do we have to notice, we have to fix it right. We have to fix it right. So Ms. Wallach, please hold my hand. What does that look like?
So, I think it's really important for your listeners to contemplate that the folks who are on the losing end of this are mainly people without college educations, but that's almost 2/3 of the American workforce.
Right.
So it's not just, a couple of places in Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan who got flattened. There's a fascinating study that's done by Celinda Lake, one of the left's great pollsters, and Mike Lux, a great American political advocate who did a project called Factory Towns you can find online. And it describes these towns. They're not just the Rust Belt. They're in California. They're in New York. They're in Texas. It's towns that really were the towns that built the American middle class, that had a decent standard of living and supported healthy communities with schools and services and were good places to live. And people who had a real purpose in life making things had mainly why the wages were better, why the standards were better, not the miracle of manufacturing. There's nothing special about that. It's because it was unionized. And so the combination of losing those kinds of jobs wasn't just the salaries, the tax bases, the towns being crushed. It was also losing 5 to 6 million union jobs in the course of just 20 years when 90,000 factories were run out of business from the big boom in deindustrialization caused by NAFTA, WTO, China entering the WTO. So that gets us to where we are. And here's the thing, the ruin and pain and suffering of that old system also provides us a certain kind of leverage. And the question you raise is it going to be used by Trump for special interest in his billionaire cabinet to make money and to stick it to people he doesn't like? Or is it going to be used, that leverage, that pain, that suffering, in transitioning to a new system that lifts everyone up? And because it's leverage. I mean, Arnie, we've got an almost $1 trillion trade deficit. That means numerous countries around the world have organized themselves towards selling stuff to us. It's disproportionately a handful of what you would call mercantilist countries, countries that practice, what are often called beggar thy neighbor policies. They suppress wages. In the Vietnams and the Chinas, the authoritarian government just says this is what the wage is, and you want to fight about it, you're shot, you're deported. In the I'm just having like a flashback to what could happen, or a flash forward to what could happen saying the word deporting in this country, but I will stick to the mission. In other countries like Germany, the tax system suppresses domestic consumption and effectively through taxation forces workers to subsidize the export industries, those big giant car companies. In other countries, it's currency manipulation. It's lowering the value of your currency so you get an unfair advantage because currency, your currency then converted to dollars, which is the world trading currency. It makes stuff cheaper than it would naturally be. It's subsidies, 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 not like the solar subsidies to get some plants started, but in China, from soup to nuts, the land is free. They build a factory. The government builds a factory for you. The water and electricity is for free. Then when the stuff is done being made, it gets schlepped to the port for free. It's on a free ship. It's just, you can't beat that. So we have this horrible imbalance and we've got all this loss. And what can we do with it? And here is the 3 parts of what we ought to do. Okay. 1, insert a floor of decency in the global economy, some global rules, because we've got global corporations and global capitalism and global trade, but there's no global floor. It's like the United States at the turn of 2 centuries ago when we had a race to the bottom among states. Who can have the youngest kids working? Who can have the lowest wages? We need a floor, and that floor exists. It's the International Labor Organization's conventions guaranteeing as a fundamental right, the right to organize, the right to come together to be free association to lobby for contracts for wages, bans on child labor. It is the multilateral environmental agreements that countries as sovereigns have signed and said, we're not going to dump toxics. We're not going to trade in hazardous waste. We're not going to be doing X, Y, and Z things. It is the rules of the World Health Organization, the actual binding treaties that provide certain rights. If we set that as a floor on which all trade had to be associated, i.e., if you don't meet those standards, you don't get the trade benefits, that would immediately lift up the standards. It's not like we'd immediately have wages the same, but would give working people and the planet and all of our health a fighting chance. That's number 1. Number 2, you have to fix the imbalance. There is no way for the benefits of trade to accrue if you never have the markets clear. And the markets, so there really are comparative advantages. That's not total baloney. We just don't have it. Of course. Because with all these distortions, there is no functioning comparative advantage. So for any of those benefits of trade, you need to stop the mercantilist distortions. Well, right now there are about 15 countries in the world that have huge and sustained net surpluses. They always export more stuff than they import. This does not happen from God. There are another 15 of them that happens from God. It just happens that Botswana has diamonds and this Trinidad and Tobago has oil and gas. Right. I'm taking out the countries that have surpluses because of a natural resource. And there are a bunch of developing countries like that. I'm talking about the countries that are manufacturing, mercantilist, export, oversuppliers. Handful of them, 66 net chronic deficit countries in the world. The US is by far the biggest deficit country. China is by far the biggest surplus country, but there are not a lot of surplus countries, and there are a growing number of the deficit countries, which, by the way, includes all the BRICS, minus China. So Russia and Brazil and India, South Africa, they all have tariffs up against China because China's deindustrializing them. So the way you do the balance, in my book, not the Trump book, because we're going to talk about, you're going to ask me what's wrong with what Trump's doing, but just to give you the vision, you get all of these countries together that are in the loser category of deficit. You get all the balanced countries, the ones that aren't having either being flattened or are using the mercantilist beggar thy neighbor rules. And you come up with a system where you say to the countries that have been mercantilist, hey, we're rebalancing trade. You can be part of this, but you can't keep doing what you're doing. And if you don't stop doing all of these beggar thy neighbor policies, you're going to be left out. And all of us here, we're doing a tariff together to countervail you. So you can still trade, but you're not coming into our fair traders system for balance unless you basically face a tariff to make up for the difference if you're cheating. And between all of us, we're all agreeing that if we start to get out of whack, we can use tariffs to rebalance each other because we want a functioning trade system. Some of us will export more, some of us will import more, but within a reason on a 5-year average, we're not going to have these consistent, ginormous imbalances. That's number 2. Number 3, we need more resilience. We've seen in the face of climate, weather catastrophes, we've seen in the health-related new, what would be called epizootics. As we're changing the climate, we are going to have more epidemics related to having, different kinds of infections that the previous climate and our population wasn't exposed to. We have seen the geopolitical uncertainties. So for things that we really need to live, we need 4 or 5 supply chains. And part of how we're organized that is managing trade. So we'll have some trade within partnerships. So let's just say we had a zone that was North America all the way down through Central America, includes the Caribbean, Canada, we're a zone. South America is one zone. And I'm talking about things like making sure we have redundancy in production of medicines, right, communications equipment, transportation equipment, basic infrastructure needs. We don't need autarky. We don't need to make it ourselves, but we need redundancy. We need to make some of it ourselves as a continental-sized country. It's with all these natural resources. It's only because of a screwed up trade system we don't make more stuff. I mean, we're a country that mainly exports dollar-denominated assets. It's bizarre.
Finance.
Yeah, it's exactly. finance. So, but we should have partnerships, and there should be other partnerships, and there should be blocks where for these key things, we allow some protection within each of these zones so that they can make sure they have actual capacity to make these things that we all need. So that, heaven forbid, there's some horrible health catastrophe in South America. South Americans get stuff from the North American bloc, Central America bloc, plus a bloc that is Europe. It's already naturally made, a couple different blocks in Asia, so that you basically have zoned together with your neighbors and partners the ability, and obviously they'll be trading between the blocks because not everyone has the resources, but to make sure that we have diversified import sources, as well as more ability to make some of these critical things ourselves. The idea of how you use the tariffs, just to close, to do all of this is you target tariffs to have balance, one use, and you set up that system. Within your own countries, you have some flexibilities to use tariffs. And as I said in the American Prospect piece, you partner that with other industrial policies because you want to have some ability to make certain key strategic things. And for smaller countries, they're going to have to do it in partnership with other countries. We have the ability with this continental country to do a lot of it here, but you pick your things, and a tariff does not a factory make. You have to have the other pieces of the policy, and it does not make a high wage if you don't accompany that with the labor standards that actually make it such that you have a unionized factory base of employment that raises the standards. There's nothing magical about manufacturing that means higher wages. Historically, there were higher wages for non-college educated people working in those jobs and in services because the union intensification was higher, the density of organizing. And it meant even if you didn't have a union shop to compete for the good workers, the non-union shops had to raise wages. So there's a whole formula of what you would do. What Trump has done is exactly the opposite. We can get to that, but that's a vision of how you use tariffs in different ways for different purposes in a mix of other policy tools. Obviously, well, not obviously, let me just say as a recovering trade attorney, Trump has done almost everything opposite of what I just described would be my version of a new trade system that would really benefit people on the planet, and for which to get to it and to run it, you'd need tariffs.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts, and I want you to get into what Trump is doing wrong as we discuss this, but I also want to remind everyone, so you talked about this isn't going to get us the factory we need tomorrow. It will take us 1, 2, 3, 5 years maybe to get that factory. So there is a time lag between what you are suggesting and when we actually can fill in that gap. okay, that you are suggesting. There's another problem here, and that is the demographic change. We are an aging nation. There aren't a lot of young people in the pipeline. And what are we doing? We are driving our first half of the show, Lori, was about all the international students that we are driving away from America. And not only what they provide by keeping our universities and colleges afloat, but what they actually mean to the economy in America, which is billions of dollars. And we're driving them away. So I am looking at the demographic explosion, which is a negative. I'm looking at the climate crisis, which means even making this investment in infrastructure somewhat precarious because you don't know if you're going to have a fire or a flood or whatever, and that there's also a time lag. So as we are implementing these trade policies, these tariff policies, these investment policies, how do we get people to bridge from where we are today to the vision that you are describing in the future, given the fact that so much is both unstable and people still need to exist? The reason why Trump won was, yes, he did talk about groceries, because as much as you might embrace a tariff, or you might be angry at Joe Biden, or you might understand what the CHIPS Act did, it didn't put food on your table or pay the rent. So get me to the place where I can both make sure people are stable at the moment. We have the demographic we need to actually invest in those factories, and that people can get to a place where they ultimately not only trust the result, but those that we're going to ask to build these factories trust that they should make this investment now, because there'll be stability 2 years from now, 3 years from now, as opposed to what we hear from Trump, which changes by the hour, depending on who is basically whispering in his ear and offering him $1 billion.
So the problem we have right now is the way Trump's tariff malpractice has gotten us all downside and no upside.
Right.
And for folks who want to dig into this and see statements about the details of it, go to our website, which is tradewatch.org, and you will see, oh my goodness, I don't believe I just did that. That's my old website. Rethinktrade.org.
Okay.
Rethinktrade.org.
Okay,
it's
go on.
Rethinktrade.org. And the way that basically going forward, we have to figure out what can be made from the mess that Trump has made of tariffs is what you want to do is minimize the risks and the costs and speed up the transition so you get the benefits as fast as possible.
Right.
There's no lying to people. There will be costs in transitioning from the system we've had to the system we need. And the question is who pays? And who has to pay are the corporations that have profiteered, not just profited, but profiteered, piracy included, towards it at the loss of workers and consumers under the old system. So how do we do that? Well, one thing that is the opposite of what Trump has done is you would transition in, phase in the tariffs. You wouldn't go from 0 to 60 because you're going to undermine the actual manufacturing companies that now have been operating under the old system and are bringing in parts, the existing ones from all over the world. So you'd want to make a higher tariff on finished goods. You'd have a lower tariff on the import of parts and machinery needed to make stuff. Mm-hmm. So that, basically as you're incentivizing more making it here, you're not taking away the ability to actually have the supply chain. That would also help reduce the price shock that can occur. Number two, you would pick your targets for tariffs to aim at the countries that are causing the biggest imbalance. And you would not be doing huge tariffs on all countries. You would not be doing big tariffs on rando small countries. You would basically pick with the countries that are the ones that are the biggest share of the problem. For the US, the global big problems, China, Germany, Korea, Japan, Taiwan. But then also we've got two bilateral deficits that matter, Mexico and Vietnam. Vietnam is just transshipping Chinese stuff. We didn't have that tariff until the first China tariff. We didn't have that deficit until the first China tariffs. Mexico is a proximity issue and a strategy of low wage investment, of crushing independent unions. But we have the US-Mexico-Canada agreement up for renegotiation this very year where that can get fixed. The way to deal with that is the USMCA renegotiation and continuing to improve labor rights in Mexico. So you would basically make your targets in a sophisticated way. Try not to alienate and anger every other partner that might be part of your bigger long-term. I'm just talking about the transition towards the bigger long-term system. Number three, exactly what you said, you have to have predictability.
Yes.
Trump has destroyed that for himself with his on again, off again, change my mind, make a mistake, oy, oy, oy. It's just totally, he's probably, between the uncertainty and then also number four, the other policies you need to have in place with the tariffs. So the industrial policies to generate demand for domestic made goods. So, what's he doing? Instead of boosting that, he's killing the Inflation Reduction Act. They're trying to kill the tax credits for domestic made EVs and for domestic made solar equipment. No, they should continue that and then double down for the new sectors. So you get some benefit if you have American made medicine, so that when they're going to put in the new tariffs on imported medicine, which again, they should phase in, not just yank it suddenly to 25%, you have actually a domestic supply because you're actually creating incentives and then the investment. You have to have investment tax credits. That's how we got that big boom of plants. I mean, most people don't know this because heartbreakingly, neither the Biden administration nor candidate Harris talked the hell about it, but we have the highest rate in factory investment in the United States of America in 30 years because their industrial policy worked. They did tax credits to get new investment in solar plants, in EV plants, in battery plants. That actually worked, Arnie. It's working, but no one knows. Trump's trying to kill it. So the missing pieces. And then in the transition, there are things you must do that aren't trade policy. You have to stop price gouging. So right now, the Federal Trade Commission has, under its statute, 6B authority, for those who want to look it up at home, the Federal Trade Commission Act, there is authority to surveil prices and to actually penalize companies that are price gouging. Price gouging means raising prices above what the actual increased cost is. Tariffs are charged on the wholesale price. A lot of companies have a huge markup because we have so much monopoly. The tennies you buy, the Nikes or whatever for $120, they come into the country for $20. Right. In that markup, you can basically absorb the tariff. The tariff is charged on the $20. If you even did a 25% tariff, it's $5 more. So it's now $25 for the $120 pair of shoes that
you're paying, right?
So there's plenty of room not to raise prices. And certainly we've heard from earnings calls, companies are like, ooh, goody, people are worried about prices because of tariffs. Let's jack up prices. So fighting the price gouging, improving union rates because we're not going to have good high wage jobs. Instead, what's the administration doing? They're killing the NLRB. They're killing international labor rights enforcement. So in every way they could, they're doing the opposite of what you would need to have the transition be something that works for people on the planet. And so what can we do? Part of it is we have to basically use the leverage we have, and that's largely Congress. And part of what we all need to do, if you're a progressive listening to this, is make sure our members of Congress are not going off the deep end and against Trump turns into pro-neoliberal. We will never be able to fix the problem using the old system. And politically, as you start out saying, we do not want to repel working class people who've effing had it over the current state of affairs.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, so what we do know is the American people do embrace the concept of tariffs, which is why he is constantly going back to that word. They know that they embrace the concept of deportation, which is why he goes back to the word. So rather than rejecting those words, we have to now teach those words and explain to them what's the difference between a good tariff and a bad tariff. I mean, we know the difference between a good priest and a bad priest. I'm going to bring this up on the day that Pope Francis dies, but we know what happened with all the sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. That's not all priests, but it was some priests. Well, it's actually true with tariffs. I hate to make that, but we need these analogies, Lori, because in a way that gives the Democrats an ability to talk about tariffs without thinking that they're embracing Donald Trump. But what they're saying is what he is embracing is like the bad priest, okay? And what we are embracing is the good priest. And the good priest is someone that you want to lead. The good tariff is something that actually adds to our economic stability. But it's too easy because we've been taught over and over again by our consultants. You know this, Lori. Okay, don't use that word. Do use this word. Well, that's not true. Economic policy is sophisticated. And if you take the time to explain it to people, you give them their understanding of the tariffs they want to. They want to because you want them. But tariffs alone is not enough. Just the way putting meat on the table is not enough without vegetables and milk. And if we make those analogies, not only do people understand what you're saying, but then you're not rejecting Trump. What you're rejecting is embrace of an abusive tariff that doesn't help them but hurts them.
You are rejecting Trump. You're not.
Yes, you are. Yes, you're rejecting Trump. But I mean, but Trump's language is successful because of how he has used it. We need to not sort of cede that language to him and take it back. And I think that's what this whole
Friends,
conversation.
a tariff is a tool. You can
Yes.
use it to build something or to smash something. We have a building vision. He has a smashing vision, but let us not throw out the tool.
You need to put the billboard up. A tariff is a tool. It can either build something or smash something. You need to use that over and over again because that speaks to middle America. That speaks to liberals or conservatives. It's what we understand. The title of the article that Lori wrote at the American Prospect was "The Trade Policy We Need." Trump's on again, off again tariffs are incoherent, but that should not discredit targeted tariffs paired with investment policy as a policy lever. And this is my message to some of the people on my side of the aisle. Don't reject everything that he says, because some of the things he says, there is some value in it, but how he uses it, not only is it abusive and incoherent, it will harm not only our economy, but the world's economy. Thank you so much for doing this, Lori Wallach. I really appreciate it. And again, if you go to the American Prospect, you will be able to see her article. And she is with an organization called Rethink Trade. It is part of the American Economic Liberties Project. I'm going to invite you back, I'm sure. So take care. Thank you.